I massacred the Xindi by the millions. I'm guilty of it all, every single charge. Commander Peter Holmes growled, spitting blood onto the sleek alien podium. The human's tight cuffs dug into his wrists as he scanned the chambers packed with dozens of alien representatives. Their wide eyes glimmered with disgust and shock. But they had to know the full context, the horrors the insectoid Xindi inflicted on humanity, to have any hope of understanding his extreme actions. Ambassador Cygnus's segmented body trembled with barely restrained fury, his compound eyes shimmering in the council chamber lights. Rows of artificial teeth clacked in his mandibles. Filthy primate scum! Your barbaric crimes against Xindi will not go unanswered. This council will see you suffer for eternity. Cygnus slammed a serrated claw on the dais. You dare plead guilty so frivolously before this body. You mock our proceedings. Holmes squared his burly shoulders and locked his organic and cybernetic eyes on Cygnus. I plead guilty, Roach. But you all need to understand why. All humanity's survival and the stability of this council are at stake. Gasps and grunts of outrage pulsated through the assembled aliens. Holmes' chains rattled as he tensed. If he couldn't make them understand the context and rationale behind his brutal actions and the immense Xindi threat, humanity would be doomed. The Xindi's twisted plan had to be unveiled, or mankind would be exterminated and the council itself corrupted. Holmes breathed deep, preparing to reveal the sickening truth that compelled his crimes. Holmes's grizzled face twisted in pain as he braced against the podium, knuckles white. He swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. It started when Xindi forces attacked our colony on Mars without warning or provocation. Thousands of civilians were slaughtered. Men, women, children. It didn't matter to them. They wanted us dead. We soon learned this was only the beginning. The Xindi planned to annihilate humanity. Holmes slammed his fist on the podium. They built secret labs on their homeworld, designed to engineer viruses that could infect and kill humans based on our DNA, bioweapons to commit genocide. Cygnus leapt up, his serrated claws slashing the air. Lies, you have no proof of these outrageous accusations. Holmes glared at the Xindi ambassador, his organic and bionic eyes smoldering. We had no choice. We had to destroy those labs before the Xindi could deploy their bioweapons against Earth and wipe us out. I led the strike team myself. Ho invaded Xindi space and butchered our people, Cygnus screeched, his segmented body quivering with rage. It was an act of war. It was self-defense against an existential threat, Holmes snarled back. You were developing WMDs to exterminate humanity. We did what was necessary to survive. The council chamber erupted into an uproar, dozens of alien representatives shouting and arguing. The presiding councillor, a lithe, azure-skinned figure, raised its long-fingered hands. Order! There will be order! The councillor demanded, its mellifluous voice somehow cutting through the din. Ambassador Cygnus, you will get your turn to speak. Commander Holmes, please proceed with your testimony. Holmes nodded curtly to the councillor, then turned back to face the assembled alien delegates. He steeled himself, knowing he would have to relive the horrific memories of what came next. The Xindi retaliated for our attack on their bioweapon labs, but they didn't strike at military targets. Instead, they assaulted our colonies, slaughtering civilians. Then, on Callisto Station, they unleashed one of their DNA-targeted bioweapons. Every man, woman, and child died in agony as the virus liquefied their organs. Gasps of shock and horror rippled through the council at this revelation. Holmes' voice roughened with anguish as the gruesome images flashed through his mind. I took a team to investigate the atrocity on Callisto. I can still see it vividly. Bodies strewn everywhere, blood splattered on the walls, the dying crying out in unimaginable pain. The Xindi didn't just kill those people. They made them suffer. And I knew deep in my bones that they wouldn't stop, not until humanity was extinct. Holmes's hands shook with rage as he described the carnage on Callisto Station, his voice raw with barely restrained fury. The bodies were mangled, limbs bent at unnatural angles. Their faces were contorted in agony, frozen in their final moments. The Xindi virus had liquefied their organs from the inside, an excruciating way to die. He turned to face Cygnus, his cybernetic eye glowing an ominous red as it focused on the Xindi ambassador. "When I saw what your bioweapon did to those innocent people, I swore I would hunt down the monsters responsible, and I would make them pay for every life they stole." Cygnus let out a harsh, clicking laugh. "You think you can threaten the Xindi Empire, human? You are nothing to us, a primitive species fumbling in the dark. You cannot comprehend our power." Holmes ignored the taunt, his organic eye hardening as he continued his testimony. "We analyzed the bioweapons residue and traced it to a secret Xindi research base hidden deep in your territory. I assembled an elite team to infiltrate the facility and gather evidence of your crimes." The council leaned forward, hanging on to every word as Holmes recounted the dangerous mission. "We had to navigate through a maze of advanced security systems, DNA scanners, pressure-sensitive floors, lethal countermeasures. Xindi soldiers patrolled every corridor, armed with pulse rifles and bioarmor. But we pushed forward, determined to uncover the truth." Gasps of horror and revulsion echoed through the council chambers. Several of the delegates looked visibly ill. Holmes's voice grew icy cold. "We subdued the head researcher and interrogated him. That's when the full scope of the Xindi's plan became clear. They were developing a supervirus, one genetically targeted to human DNA. A single vial could eradicate an entire planet, and they were preparing to unleash it on Earth, to exterminate humanity once and for all." Cygnus shot to his feet, his carapace flushed with anger. "I will not stand for these baseless accusations. The Xindi would never engage in such dishonorable tactics. This human has no evidence." Holmes reached into his pocket and held up a small data drive, his eyes never leaving Cygnus. "I have all the evidence right here, Ambassador. Schematics of the virus, test logs detailing its lethal effects, planetary dispersal simulations. We ripped them straight from the base's mainframe. The Council will now see the Xindi's true face." Holmes watched the Council members' faces twist in disgust and outrage as they pored over the damning files on his data drive. Whispers of genocide and monstrous flitted through the chamber. Cygnus slammed his claws on the podium, his segmented eyes blazing. "This proves nothing. The humans could have fabricated this evidence to justify their own aggression." Holmes stood, his bionic eye flashing crimson as he faced the Xindi ambassador head-on. "I've had enough of your lies and deception. It's time for the truth to come out." He turned to the Council. "In light of this evidence, I propose a full investigation into the Xindi's bioweapons program. We must ensure such a threat never again rises to threaten galactic peace." The chamber broke into an uproar, dozens of alien voices shouting at once. Some pounded their fists and demanded immediate sanctions against the Xindi. Others yelled for more proof. In the midst of the chaos, the doors burst open. A towering Xindi in military regalia strode in, his carapace gleaming. He marched straight to Cygnus and hissed something in the ambassador's ear. Cygnus blanched, his mandibles going slack. He cleared his throat and addressed the Council, his voice shaky. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding. The bioweapons program was the work of a rogue faction in our government, acting without the knowledge or consent of our leadership. We will launch our own investigation and bring those responsible to justice." Holmes narrowed his eyes. Something stank about this sudden reversal. "And why should we trust your word, Ambassador? Your people have shown nothing but deceit and aggression towards humanity." The Xindi officer stepped forward, drawing himself up to his full imposing height. "Because, Commander Holmes, we have a common enemy. The rogue faction behind these bioweapons is not loyal to the Xindi government. They are a terrorist group known as the Scorpius, and they've infiltrated the highest levels of our society." Murmurs of shock and concern rippled through the Council. Holmes leaned forward, his brow furrowed. If this Scorpius group had infiltrated the Xindi government, they could be even more dangerous than he realized. He needed to find out everything he could. "Tell me more about this Scorpius, officer." Holmes trailed off, raising an eyebrow at the Xindi. "General Xyrax," the officer replied, inclining his angular head. "I lead our efforts against Scorpius. Their spies riddle our government, military, even this council. That's why we couldn't uncover the bioweapons plot earlier. Scorpius operatives hid it from us." Cygnus shifted uncomfortably as Zyrax spoke, refusing to meet Holmes' gaze. The general continued, "Scorpius aims to plunge the galaxy into chaos and seize power in the aftermath. Attacking Earth was meant to provoke a war between humanity and the Zindi, a war that would leave both sides vulnerable to their machinations." Holmes clenched his fists, a cold knot forming in his gut. If Zyrax was telling the truth, he'd been fighting the wrong enemy all along. The real threat, the Scorpius, still lurked in the shadows. "If what you say is true, General, then we have to act quickly," Holmes said. "Scorpius could already be planning their next move. We need to pool our intelligence, root out their agents, and stop them before they can do more damage." Zyrax nodded, his compound eyes gleaming. "Agreed, Commander. I propose a joint task force between our peoples to combat this threat. Together, we can destroy Scorpius and prevent them from starting an all-out galactic war." "I'm willing to work with you to stop Scorpius, General. But understand this, I don't trust you, not yet. Your people have done too much harm to mine. You'll have to earn that trust with actions, not words." Zyrax clicked his mandibles, a glint of respect in his eyes. "I would expect nothing less from you, Commander. I know our peoples have a long, bloody history, but we must put that aside and focus on the real enemy. Too much is at stake." Holmes narrowed his eyes, his scarred face twisting with suspicion as he faced off against General Zyrax. "Do you take me for a fool, Zindi? After all the lies and deception from your kind, you expect me to just swallow this story about some rogue terrorist group?" Zyrax remained stoic, his angular features betraying no emotion. He tapped a button on his wrist computer, and a holographic display sprang to life, hovering over the council chamber. "The proof is all here, Commander. Communications between high-ranking government officials and Scorpius operatives, schematics for advanced bioweapons far beyond anything we've developed, and this—" The display shifted, showing a star map with several key systems highlighted in pulsing red. Zyrax zoomed in on one, revealing a detailed plan of attack. "Earth. The Scorpius intend to release a DNA-targeted supervirus in your most populous cities. They want to cripple your government and military in one swift strike." Murmurs of alarm spread through the council as the representatives studied the damning evidence. One by one, their expressions morphed from skepticism to grim realization. The Scorpius threat was very real, and it extended far beyond humanity's borders. Holmes gritted his teeth, his organic hand clenching into a fist. As much as he loathed the idea of working with the Zindi, he couldn't deny the severity of the situation. If these fanatics have their way, no species in the galaxy will be safe. We have to stop them, whatever it takes. He turned to address the council, his voice booming with authority. "I propose a joint task force combining the best of human and Zindi military might. We pool our resources, our intelligence, and we hunt down every last Scorpius cell until the galaxy is secure." The chamber erupted into a frenzy of heated debate, with representatives shouting over each other to be heard. Some decried the idea of aligning with the Zindi as madness, while others argued that extraordinary times called for extraordinary measures. Cygnus rose from his seat, his carapace clicking as he moved. "The Zindi stand ready to atone for the crimes of our wayward brethren. In the face of this common enemy, we offer our full cooperation and support to this endeavor." As the council session adjourned, Holmes and Zyrax met in a private chamber, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a blade. Holmes wasted no time in laying down the law. "Let's get one thing straight, General. I don't trust you, I don't like you. But if we're going to take down these Scorpius bastards, we need to work together. That means full transparency, no secrets, no hidden agendas. Understood?" Zyrax clicked his mandibles, his compound eyes reflecting the room's dim light. "I would expect nothing less, Commander. But remember, the feeling is mutual. If you betray us, if you use this alliance to further your own goals, there will be consequences." Zyrax produced a data crystal, and tossed it to Holmes, who snatched it out of the air with his cybernetic hand. "Everything we have is on there. I suggest we start by identifying their leadership and targeting them first. Cut off the head, and the body will wither." Holmes slotted the crystal into his wrist computer, his eyes already scanning the scrolling data. "Agreed. It's time to take the fight to these terrorists, and God help anyone who gets in our way." The unlikely allies pored over the intelligence, mapping out their strategy with cold precision. They both knew the road ahead would be long and bloody, filled with untold dangers and hidden foes. But they also knew that failure was not an option. For the sake of the galaxy, for the survival of their species, they would have to put aside their differences and work as one. The hunt for Scorpius had begun, and heaven and hell combined couldn't save the terrorists now. The docking clamps hissed as the sleek corvette settled onto the grimy landing pad. Commander Peter Holmes scanned the derelict space station through the viewport, his organic eye narrowed. Zirax shifted beside him, the Xindi general's carapace gleaming under the harsh lights of the cockpit. "Are you sure your intel is solid?" Holmes asked, checking the charge on his pulse rifle. "This place looks like it's about to fall apart." Zirax's mandibles clicked in what might have been a chuckle. "That's precisely why the Scorpius use it as a meeting point. No one would think to look for them here." Holmes grunted, unconvinced. He stood and faced the mixed team of human and Xindi operatives in the hold. "Listen up. Our target is a Scorpius informant named Crix. We need him alive. He has vital information on the terrorists' operations." The team checked their weapons and adjusted their armor, their faces grim with determination. Holmes felt a flicker of pride at their professionalism, even as his gut churned with unease. Working with the Xindi still felt unnatural, like a violation of some deep-seated instinct. He shook off the feeling and hit the hatch release. The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing the pitted metal of the landing pad. Holmes and Zirax led the way, their boots ringing on the grating. The station's interior was a maze of twisting corridors and shadowy alcoves, the air thick with the stench of rust and decay. Shady figures lurked in the shadows, their eyes glinting with malice and greed. Holmes kept his rifle at the ready, his senses on high alert. Zirax consulted a holographic map on his wrist computer. Crix's last known location is in the market district, 2 levels down. We should hurry. He may already be on the move. Holmes nodded curtly and signaled the team to follow. They descended a rickety stairwell, the metal groaning under their weight. The market district was a chaotic jumble of stalls and shops, hawkers shouting their wares over the din of the crowd. Holmes scanned the faces of the passers-by, searching for the distinctive insectoid features of their target. Suddenly, Zirax stiffened beside him. "There!" the general hissed, pointing with a serrated claw. Crix was scuttling through the crowd, his compound eyes darting nervously from side to side. Holmes saw the informant had spotted them and was about to bolt. "Take him down!" Holmes barked into his comm, "non-lethal force only." The team surged forward, shoving startled shoppers aside. Crix let out a shrill screech and scampered down a side alley, his spindly legs a blur. Holmes and Zirax sprinted after him, their boots pounding the grimy metal. Crix skidded around a corner and found himself facing a dead end, the alley blocked by a rusting bulkhead. He spun to face his pursuers, mandibles quivering in fear. Holmes leveled his rifle at the informant. "It's over, Crix. Come quietly and you won't be harmed." The insectoid's bulbous eyes flicked from Holmes to Zirax and back again. I can't tell you anything. The Scorpius will kill me." Zirax stepped forward, his claws flexing. "And what do you think we will do if you don't cooperate?" Crix shrank back, his carapace rattling. "No, please, I'll tell you what I know. Just don't hurt me." Holmes lowered his rifle a fraction. "Start talking, Bug. Where are the Scorpius hiding?" The informant's mandibles worked frantically. I don't know exactly, but I heard some of them talking about a big weapons cache they have stashed away. Said it was on some asteroid in the Calyx Nebula." Zirax grabbed Crix by the throat, slamming him against the bulkhead. "The coordinates now." Crick squealed in pain and stammered out a string of numbers. Holmes quickly input them into his wrist computer. It was a lead, maybe not to the Scorpius's main base, but it was a start. He nodded to Zyrax, who released Crix with a disgusted shove. The informant crumpled to the ground, twitching feebly. "Get a containment team down here to secure the prisoner," Holmes ordered into his comm. "We're moving out. We have a cache to raid." The team regrouped at the corvette, checking their gear and loading fresh power cells into their weapons. Holmes brought up a holo display of the Calyx Nebula, marking the coordinates Crix had given them. "The asteroid is in the nebula's outer edge, far from any major shipping lanes," he said, studying the map. "Perfect spot for a hidden weapons cache." Zyrax nodded, his compound eyes glinting. "The Scorpius may already know we're coming. We should expect heavy resistance." Holmes met the general's gaze. "Then we'll just have to hit them harder. This ends today." The corvette lifted off from the station, its engines flaring bright against the starry void. Holmes watched the derelict recede in the viewport, his jaw set with determination. They had their first solid lead on the Scorpius. Now it was time to bring the fight to the enemy. The Calyx Nebula loomed before them, a swirling mass of ionized gas and dust that glowed an eerie green. The corvette dove into the nebula's outer reaches, its sensors probing for the elusive asteroid. "I'm detecting a large metallic mass at the coordinates Crix provided," the navigator reported, her fingers flying over her console. "Looks like a hollowed-out asteroid, with significant energy readings." "That's got to be the cache," Holmes said, leaning forward in his seat. "Bring us in nice and quiet. Let's not tip them off." The corvette glided towards the asteroid, its running lights dimmed to avoid detection. As they drew closer, Holmes could make out the rough-hewn contours of the asteroid's surface, pitted and scarred by centuries of cosmic debris. Suddenly a barrage of laser fire erupted from hidden emplacements on the asteroid's surface. The bolt slammed into the corvette's shields, making the deck shudder beneath their feet. "It's a trap," Zyrax snarled, his claws digging into the armrests of his chair. "They knew we were coming." Holmes cursed under his breath. Crix must have tipped off the Scorpius, or they had some other means of monitoring the station. Either way, the element of surprise was lost. The pilot wrenched the controls, sending the corvette into a dizzying spiral. The inertial dampeners struggled to compensate, and Holmes felt his stomach lurch. More laser blasts streaked past the viewport, some coming perilously close to breaching the shields. Holmes knew they couldn't take much more of this punishment. "There!" Zyrax pointed to a small landing pad jutting out from the asteroid's surface. "We can make our stand there." Holmes hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "Do it. Bring us in hot and drop the ramp. We'll jump out firing." The corvette screamed towards the landing pad, its shields flaring as it absorbed more hits. The instant the landing gear touched down, Holmes and Zyrax were out of their seats and rushing to the hold, the rest of the team close behind. The ramp lowered, and they were greeted by a hail of blaster fire. Red bolts crisscrossed the air, sizzling past their heads and scorching the deck plates. Holmes and Zyrax hit the ground running, zigzagging to avoid the incoming fire. They dove behind a row of supply crates, the metal containers shuddering as blaster bolts pinged off their surfaces. Holmes risked a glance over the top of the crate. Dozens of Scorpius insurgents were arrayed in a semicircle around the landing pad, pouring a withering fire onto their position. They were well armed and dug in, with reinforced barricades and heavy weapons emplacements. "We're outnumbered and outgunned," Holmes shouted to Zyrax over the din of battle. "We need a plan, fast." Zyrax fired off a burst from his pulse rifle, dropping a Scorpius gunner. "We have to flank them," the general said, ducking back down as a blaster bolt sizzled overhead. "It's our only chance." Zyrax hesitated for a moment, his compound eyes unreadable. Then he clasped Holmes's shoulder, his claws digging into the human's armor. "Don't get yourself killed, human. We still have work to do." Holmes gave a tight smile. "Same to you, Bug. Now let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with us." The two teams split up, darting from cover to cover as they began their flanking maneuver. Holmes led his group in a headlong charge, firing from the hip as they ran. Blaster bolts filled the air, sizzling past so close that Holmes could feel their heat on his face. One of his men went down, clutching a smoking hole in his chest. Holmes gritted his teeth and pushed on, determined to make the Scorpius pay for every drop of blood they spilled. He caught a glimpse of Xyrax and his team on the other side of the landing pad, the Xindi moving with a predatory grace as they closed in on the enemy's flank. For a moment, Holmes felt a flicker of something that might have been respect for his unlikely ally. Then a blaster bolt sizzled past his ear, and he was back in the moment, firing and moving, his blood singing with the thrill of battle. The Scorpius were about to learn the hard way what happened when you crossed Commander Peter Holmes and General Xyrax. They were an unlikely team, forged in the crucible of war, but together they just might be enough to save the galaxy from the Scorpius threat. Holmes smiled grimly as he sighted down his rifle at a Scorpius insurgent. Holmes and Xyrax's team surged forward, pulse rifles spitting blue fire as they charged the Scorpius line. The terrorists, caught in the brutal crossfire, scrambled for cover, but it was too late. The humans and Xindi had them trapped in a lethal pincer move. "Push forward," Holmes roared over the din of battle. "Don't give them an inch." The combined forces slammed into the Scorpius flanks like a hammer, shattering their formation. The terrorists fell back in disarray, abandoning their positions and fleeing deeper into the asteroid field. Holmes and Xyrax pressed the advantage, their boots pounding on the rocky ground as they chased down the retreating enemy. Scorpius fighters fell before their relentless assault, their broken bodies littering the battlefield. As the last shots echoed through the jagged canyons, an eerie silence fell over the asteroid. Holmes and Xyrax regrouped with their teams, checking for casualties and assessing the situation. "We got them on the run," Xyrax growled, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "But they left in a hurry. They might have left something behind." Holmes nodded, already scanning the abandoned Scorpius positions for intel. "Spread out and search the area. Look for anything that might give us a lead on their main base." The teams fanned out, picking through the debris and shattered equipment. It was Xyrax who found the datapad, half buried under a pile of twisted metal. "Commander, over here," the Xindi called out, holding up the device. Holmes hurried over, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned the datapad. Streams of code flashed across the screen, then resolved into a set of coordinates. "Well, well," Holmes murmured, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Looks like we've got our next target." He turned to face the assembled teams, the datapad clutched in his hand. "Listen up. We've got a lead on the Scorpius's main base. It's deep in uncharted space, hidden in a dense asteroid field. This could be our chance to take them out once and for all." The soldiers exchanged determined looks, their weapons gripped tight. They knew the risks, but they also knew what was at stake. The Scorpius had to be stopped, no matter the cost. "Prep the ships for departure," Holmes ordered. "We're going hunting." The journey through uncharted space was tense and nerve-wracking. The dense asteroid field loomed ahead, a treacherous maze of jagged rock and shifting gravity wells. One wrong move could spell disaster for the entire fleet. As they approached the coordinates, Holmes felt a growing sense of unease. The asteroids seemed to press in from all sides, their twisted shadows concealing untold dangers. Suddenly, the proximity alarms blared to life. "Multiple contacts incoming fast," the sensor officer shouted. Holmes barely had time to react before a swarm of Scorpius fighters burst from the asteroid field, their hulls glinting in the starlight. They fell upon the human and Xindi ships like locusts, their laser cannons spitting deadly fire. "Evasive maneuvers," Holmes barked, wrenching the controls of his fighter. "Engage the enemy, but watch your backs." The space around the fleet erupted into a maelstrom of flashing lasers and exploding ships. The human and Xindi pilots fought with desperate skill, weaving through the asteroid field and trying to outmaneuver their fanatical opponents. Holmes gritted his teeth as he watched another human fighter vanish in a ball of flame. The Scorpius were taking a heavy toll, and they showed no signs of letting up. "We need a new plan," Zyrax growled over the comm, his own ship barely evading a barrage of laser fire. At this rate, they'll whittle us down to nothing. Holmes scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. The Scorpius had the advantage in speed and maneuverability, but there had to be a way to turn the tables. Then he saw it, a weakness in the enemy formation, a small gap where the Scorpius ships were spread too thin. If they could punch through that gap, they might be able to break the Scorpius line and turn the battle in their favor. "All ships concentrate fire on Sector 7G, Holmes commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "We're going to blast a hole through their defenses and take the fight to them." As one, the fleet swung into action, their weapons converging on the weak point in the Scorpius line. Laser fire and plasma torpedoes slammed into the enemy ships, tearing through their bioarmor and sending them spinning off into the void. The Scorpius formation buckled, then shattered under the onslaught. The remaining fighters scattered, their coordination gone. "Now's our chance," Holmes shouted. "All ships, full throttle, we're going in." The fleet surged forward, plunging into the heart of the asteroid field. The Scorpius ships gave chase, but they were disorganized and outmatched. The human and Xindi ships picked them off one by one, their lasers flashing in the darkness. Finally, the last Scorpius fighter exploded in a brilliant fireball, and silence descended over the battlefield. The fleet regrouped, battered but victorious. But as they approached the coordinates of the Scorpius base, a new horror awaited them. The asteroid was no mere hideout. It was a massive bioweapons factory, its surface bristling with armored domes and pulsing conduits. "By the gods," Zyrax breathed, his compound eyes wide with shock. "The Scorpius have been busy." Holmes felt a cold knot form in his gut as he stared at the monstrous facility. The bioweapons churned out by this factory could doom not just humanity, but every species in the galaxy. "We have to destroy it," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "No matter the cost, we cannot let the Scorpius unleash their plagues upon the stars." Zyrax nodded grimly, his claws flexing on the control yoke. "Agreed, but a frontal assault would be suicide. We need a new plan." Holmes studied the readouts on his display, his mind racing. The factory was heavily defended, its surface bristling with laser turrets and missile batteries. But every fortress had a weakness, and Holmes was determined to find this one's. "There," he said, pointing to a schematic of the factory's lower levels. "The main reactor core. If we can plant explosives there, we can trigger a chain reaction that will destroy the entire facility." Zyrax leaned forward, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "A sound plan, but reaching the core will not be easy. The Scorpius will have it heavily guarded." Holmes gave a grim smile. "Then we'll just have to be sneaky. A small infiltration team might be able to slip past their defenses and plant the bombs. It's risky, but it's our best shot." The Xindi general hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'm with you, Commander. Let's go plant some fireworks." The infiltration team assembled in the airlock, checking their weapons and equipment. Holmes and Zyrax were at the head of the group, their faces set with grim determination. "Remember the plan," Holmes said, his voice low and intense. "We get in, plant the explosives, and get out fast. The Scorpius will be on high alert, so stay sharp and watch each other's backs." The team nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. They knew the stakes, and they were ready to do whatever it took to stop the Scorpius. The airlock hissed open, and the team moved out onto the asteroid's surface. The factory loomed ahead, its armored domes glinting in the starlight. They made their way forward, hugging the shadows and avoiding the roving patrols of Scorpius guards. The terrorists were on high alert, their weapons sweeping the perimeter for any sign of intruders. But Holmes and Zyrax were experts at stealth, and they led their team through the gaps in the enemy's defenses. They slipped past sensor grids and sentry guns, making their way deeper into the factory complex. As they approached the main reactor core, the resistance intensified. Scorpius soldiers swarmed the corridors, their weapons spitting deadly fire. The infiltration team fought back with grim determination, their own weapons flashing in the dimly lit halls. Holmes and Zyrax fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized. They cut down Scorpius troops with ruthless efficiency, their weapons flashing in a deadly dance. But the terrorists kept coming, throwing themselves at the team in waves of fanatical fury. They cared nothing for their own lives, only for the chance to spill human and Xindi blood. "We're running out of time," Zyrax snarled, his pulse rifle blazing as he cut down another charging Scorpius. "We have to reach the reactor core before they overwhelm us." Holmes gritted his teeth, his cybernetic eye flashing as he scanned the corridor ahead. The reactor core was close, but the Scorpius were massing for another attack. "We'll have to split up," he said, his voice grim. "Zyrax, take half the team and hold this position. Buy me as much time as you can. I'll take the rest and plant the explosives." The Xindi general hesitated for a moment, his compound eyes locked on Holmes. "Are you sure about this, Commander? The Scorpius will not make it easy for you." Holmes gave a tight smile. "I'm counting on it, but this is our only chance to end this once and for all. We have to take it." Zyrax nodded, his mandibles clicking with determination. "Understood. We will hold the line for as long as we can. Good hunting, Commander." The two teams split up, Zyrax leading his group in a fierce rearguard action, while Holmes pressed forward with the rest. The corridor ahead was swarming with Scorpius, their weapons spitting deadly fire. But Holmes was a force of nature, his cybernetic enhancements giving him an edge in speed and strength. He charged into the fray, his pulse rifle blazing as he cut a path through the enemy ranks. His team followed close behind, their own weapons flashing in the chaos of battle. They fought with grim determination, knowing that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. Finally, they reached the reactor core, a massive chamber filled with pulsing conduits and thrumming machinery. The Scorpius were waiting for them, their weapons trained on the entrance. "This is it," Holmes shouted, his voice rising above the din of battle. "Plant the explosives and let's get the hell out of here." The team surged forward, their weapons blazing as they engaged the Scorpius in a desperate final stand. Holmes and his soldiers fought like demons, their pulse rifles flashing in the dimly lit chamber. But the Scorpius were relentless, throwing themselves at the team in waves of fanatical fury. They cared nothing for their own lives, only for the chance to defend their twisted creation. Holmes gritted his teeth as he planted the last explosive charge, his cybernetic eye scanning the chamber for any sign of the enemy. The Scorpius were closing in, their weapons spitting deadly fire. The team fell back, fighting a desperate rearguard action as they made their way back to the extraction point. The Scorpius pursued them relentlessly, their weapons flashing in the dimly lit corridors. But Holmes and his soldiers were fueled by a grim determination, a resolve to see their mission through no matter the cost. They fought with a savage fury, their weapons cutting down Scorpius troops with ruthless efficiency. Finally, they reached the airlock where Zyrax and his team were waiting, their own weapons blazing as they held back the enemy tide. The two groups reunited, their faces grim with exhaustion and resolve. Zyrax nodded, his compound eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Then let's not waste any more time. All teams fall back to the ships. We're getting out of here." The human and Xindi soldiers piled into the waiting shuttles, their weapons still flashing, as they fought off the pursuing Scorpius. The ships lifted off from the asteroid's surface, their engines roaring as they clawed for the safety of space. Behind them, the bioweapons factory loomed like a malevolent presence, its armored domes glinting in the starlight. But as the shuttles streaked away, a series of massive explosions ripped through the facility, tearing it apart from the inside out. The asteroid shuddered and buckled, its surface cracking and splintering as the chain reaction spread. The factory disappeared in a blinding flash of light, consumed by the fury of its own destruction. In the shuttles, the human and Xindi soldiers watched in stunned silence as the explosion faded, leaving only a field of shattered rock and debris. They had done it. They had struck a devastating blow against the Scorpius and destroyed their monstrous creation. But as Holmes stared out the viewport at the devastation, he knew that their fight was far from over. The Scorpius were still out there, scattered among the stars, and they would not rest until they had their revenge. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning, and Holmes and Xyrax would be at the forefront, leading the charge against the terrorists who threatened the galaxy. It was a daunting task, but one they would face together, united by a common cause and an unbreakable bond forged in the heat of battle. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Scorpius would learn to fear the names of Holmes and Xyrax and the alliance they had forged in the face of impossible odds. The two warriors exchanged a nod, their faces set with grim determination. "We're not finished," Holmes growled. "Not by a long shot," Xyrax agreed, mandibles clicking. "The Scorpius will pay for their crimes." As the battered fleet limped away from the shattered remains of the bioweapons facility, Holmes knew their mission had only just begun. The Scorpius threat still loomed, casting a shadow over the fragile peace they had won. But with Xyrax at his side, he felt a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Together they would hunt down every last trace of the terrorists and bring them to justice, no matter the cost. Holmes' organic hand clenched into a fist as he stared out into the infinite void of space, stars glinting cold and merciless. The path ahead would be long and bloody, fraught with untold dangers. But he was ready to face them head-on. For the sake of the galaxy, for the future of his species and all others, he would not rest until the Scorpius were nothing more than a bitter memory. His cybernetic eye, a glowing red ember, reflected the cold light of distant suns as the fleet pressed onward into the unknown. The hunt had only just begun. As Holmes and Xyrax battled their way through the twisting corridors of the Scorpius base, the stench of death and chemicals grew stronger with each step. They blasted through another sealed door and stumbled into a scene straight out of a nightmare. The cavernous laboratory was filled with row upon row of stasis pods, each one containing a human in various stages of mutation. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, their skin mottled with grotesque growths. Some moaned in agony, while others lay ominously still. Holmes froze, his blood turning to ice as he recognized a face among the horror. Captain Jack Hawkins, his friend and comrade, lay in one of the pods, his once strong body ravaged by the bioweapons. Hawkins's eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. "Verita," Hawkins rasped, his voice barely human. "Please, end it. The pain." Holmes gripped his rifle with white knuckles, his jaw clenched. He stepped forward, pressing the barrel to Hawkins's head. He pulled the trigger, and Hawkins went limp, finally at peace. Holmes stood there for a long moment, his shoulders shaking with grief and rage. Xyrax placed a clawed hand on his shoulder. "We will make them pay for this," the Zindi growled. "We will destroy this abomination and avenge your friend." Holmes nodded, his eyes hardening with renewed purpose. They forged ahead, fighting through the last of the Scorpius defenses until they reached the base's throbbing heart, the main reactor core. But as they prepared to plant the explosives, a massive figure dropped from the ceiling, landing before them with a ground-shaking impact. Krazax, the monstrous leader of the Scorpius, rose to his full height, his chitinous armor glinting in the harsh light. "Foolish primates," Krazax hissed, unsheathing a pair of crackling plasma blades. "You think you can stop us? We have already won." The insectoid warlord lunged, his blades slashing through the air. Holmes and Xyrax leapt aside, narrowly avoiding decapitation. They attacked as one, pulse rifle and plasma claws against whirring plasma blades, human and Zindi united against a common foe. Krazax was a whirlwind of death, his blades leaving sizzling after-images as he pressed the attack. Holmes took a glancing blow to the shoulder, the searing pain fueling his rage. Xyrax hammered at the warlord's armored carapace, seeking a weak point. "You fight for nothing," Krazax taunted as they clashed. "Even now our agents slumber on your worlds, waiting for the signal to unleash the final plague. Billions will die, and the Scorpius will rise from the ashes." "Not if we stop you first," Holmes snarled. Xyrax seized his moment and lunged, sinking his plasma claws into a gap in Krazax's armor. The warlord howled in pain, ichor spurting from the wound. Holmes pressed the advantage, hammering Krazax with his rifle butt. The insectoid reeled off balance. Holmes raised his rifle and fired point blank, the plasma bolt punching through Krazax's skull. The warlord fell, his blades clattering to the deck. But there was no time to savor the victory. Holmes and Zyrax raced to the reactor, planting the explosives even as alarms blared and the base shook around them. As they sprinted for the exit, a horde of Scorpius drones poured into the reactor chamber, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. Holmes and Zyrax mowed them down, rifles blazing, watching each other's backs. The timer counted down as they fought, debris raining down as the base began to collapse. With seconds to spare, they leapt into the evac ship, punching the engines to full burn. The ship screamed away from the base, outrunning the expanding fireball. Behind them, the asteroid and the Scorpius base vanished in a blinding flash, a miniature supernova blooming in the void. In the chaos of the explosion, the evac ship went spinning out of control, alarms shrieking as Holmes and Zyrax fought to stabilize the tumbling craft. Girders buckled and support beams cracked, the shriek of rending metal filling the air as the ship threatened to shake itself apart. As the evac ship spun out of control, Holmes and Zyrax fought to stabilize it. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, filling the cockpit with acrid smoke. Holmes' hands flew over the controls, his cybernetic eye flickering as he diverted power to the stabilizers. Zyrax braced himself against a bulkhead, his claws digging into the metal as he struggled to reach the backup systems. With a final desperate maneuver, they managed to level out the ship, the gravity plating groaning under the strain. They limped back to the nearest human outpost, their vessel battered and scarred, a testament to the ferocity of the battle they had just survived. As they disembarked, a team of medics rushed to meet them, tending to their wounds and checking for any signs of contamination from the bioweapons facility. Holmes and Zyrax, exhausted but triumphant, were ushered into a debriefing room to report on their mission. The news of their victory spread quickly, and soon they found themselves standing before the Galactic Council once again. The chamber was abuzz with excitement and anticipation, the representatives of 100 worlds eager to hear the details of the daring raid. Holmes and Zyrax took turns recounting the mission, their voices raw with emotion as they described the horrors they had witnessed in the Scorpius base. They spoke of the bravery of their team, the sacrifices they had made to ensure the galaxy's safety. As they concluded their report, the council erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the vaulted chamber. The presiding councillor, her voice trembling with emotion, declared that the alliance between humanity and the Xindi would be formalized, a new era of cooperation and unity in the face of the Scorpius threat. But even as they basked in the glow of their victory, a new crisis was unfolding. Across the galaxy, long-dormant Scorpius sleeper agents were awakening, triggered by the death of their leader. On a dozen worlds, terrorists struck without warning, sowing chaos and destruction. On Earth, a group of heavily armed insurgents stormed a nuclear power plant, seizing control of the facility and threatening to detonate the reactor if their demands were not met. They were led by a figure from Holmes's past, a brilliant Scorpius scientist who had been presumed killed in an earlier battle. Holmes, his body still aching from the wounds he had sustained in the raid on the Scorpius base, volunteered to lead the counter-assault. He assembled a team of Earth's most elite soldiers and law enforcement officers, each one hand-picked for their skills and courage. As they approached the power plant, they could see the terrorists had fortified their position, setting up barricades and gun emplacements to repel any attack. Holmes divided his team into two groups, one to assault the main gate and draw the terrorists' fire, the other to infiltrate the facility through a maintenance tunnel. With a silent nod, Holmes signaled the attack. The main gate team charged forward, their weapons blazing as they drew the terrorists' attention. Holmes led the infiltration team into the tunnels, the narrow confines lit only by the glow of their weapon lights. They emerged into the heart of the power plant, the reactor looming before them like a slumbering beast. The terrorists were waiting for them, opening fire from elevated walkways and control rooms. Holmes and his team dove for cover, returning fire as they pushed deeper into the facility. The battle was fierce and brutal, a close-quarters nightmare of flashing muzzles and ricocheting bullets. Holmes fought like a man possessed, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts as he advanced on the enemy positions. As they neared the reactor control room, they found their path blocked by a heavily armored door, the terrorists' final line of defense. Holmes called for breaching charges, the explosives detonating with a deafening roar. They stormed into the control room, smoke swirling around them, and found themselves face to face with the terrorist leader. The Scorpius scientist, his face twisted with madness, held a dead man switch in his hand, his thumb hovering over the trigger. "Surrender, Holmes," he cackled, his eyes gleaming with insanity, "or I'll detonate the reactor and destroy everything you hold dear." Holmes, his rifle leveled at the scientist's chest, shook his head. "It's over, Doctor. Your forces are defeated, your base destroyed. There's nothing left for you now." The scientist's laughter took on a manic edge. "You think this is the end, Holmes? It's only the beginning. Even now my creations are spreading across the galaxy, a plague that will consume all in its path." With a wordless cry of rage, the scientist charged forward, his finger tightening on the dead man's switch. Holmes fired, his rounds stitching across the terrorist's chest, but still he came on, his body driven by hate and madness. They collided in a tangle of limbs, struggling for control of the switch. Holmes felt the scientist's fist slam into his ribs, heard the crack of bone. He responded with a headbutt, feeling the crunch of cartilage as the scientist's nose shattered. The switch fell to the floor, skittering away into the shadows. Holmes lunged for it, his fingers closing around the device just as the scientist's foot slammed down on his wrist. He felt the bones snap, a white-hot lance of pain shooting up his arm. With a final desperate effort, Holmes brought his other fist up, the cybernetic fingers closing around the scientist's throat. He squeezed, servos whining, until he felt the vertebrae shatter and the scientist went limp. Holmes dragged himself to the reactor controls, his vision blurring, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could see the countdown ticking away, the numbers flashing red. With a shaking hand, he input the override code, his fingers leaving bloody smears on the keypad. The countdown stopped, the reactor powering down with a low whine. Holmes slumped against the console, his strength fading. He could feel the radiation sickness taking hold, his body shutting down as the bioweapons ravaged his cells. As he drifted into unconsciousness, he thought of Xyrax and the battles still to come. The Scorpius threat was far from over, and the galaxy would need its heroes more than ever. With a final shuddering breath, Holmes embraced the darkness, knowing that he had given everything he had to protect those he held dear. As the Xindi medical ship streaked through the void, its engines straining at maximum output, Holmes lay on the operating table, his body ravaged by radiation and bioweapon exposure. The human's vital signs were crashing, his organs shutting down one by one. Xyrax burst into the medical bay, his exoskeleton still scarred from the battle on the Xindi homeworld. The general had barely paused to treat his own wounds before rushing to his ally's side. "Status report," Xyrax barked at the Xindi surgeons, his compound eyes fixed on Holmes's motionless form. "Critical," the lead surgeon replied, her manipulator arms a blur as she worked to stabilize the human. "The damage is extensive. We'll need to initiate an emergency bioregeneration sequence." Xyrax nodded, his mandibles clicking with tension. "Do whatever it takes. We need him alive." The surgeons swarmed over Holmes, injecting him with advanced nanites and immersing him in a tank of regenerative fluid. For days, the human floated in the viscous liquid, his body slowly knitting itself back together. Xyrax never left the medical bay, watching over his friend through the tank's translucent walls. The general paced restlessly, his claws clicking against the deck plates as he waited for any sign of improvement. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Holmes's eyes fluttered open. The human blinked in confusion, his gaze focusing on Xyrax's angular features. "Welcome back," the Xindi rumbled, relief evident in his tone. "You had us worried." Holmes tried to speak, but his throat was raw and parched. He gestured weakly, and Xyrax handed him a cup of water. As the human drank, he noticed something strange. His senses seemed sharper, more acute. He could hear the hum of the ship's engines, smell the tang of disinfectant in the air. "What happened?" Holmes asked, his voice rough but strong. "I feel different." Xyrax exchanged a glance with the surgeons. The bioregeneration process was extensive. It may have had some unexpected effects. Holmes pushed himself up on his elbows, marveling at the strength in his muscles. He felt like he could lift a shuttle with his bare hands. "What kind of effects?" he demanded, a sense of unease growing in his gut. "Enhanced strength, speed, senses," Xyrax replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Your human physiology has been altered at a fundamental level." Holmes stared at his hands, his mind reeling. He had always prided himself on his humanity, on the grit and determination that had seen him through countless battles. But now he felt like a stranger in his own skin. As he struggled to come to terms with his new reality, a chime sounded from the comm panel. Xyrax answered it, his expression growing grim as he listened to the message. "The Galactic Council has declared the Scorpius threat over," the general reported, turning to face Holmes. "The alliance between our peoples has been formalized." Holmes frowned, his enhanced senses tingling with unease. Something didn't feel right. The Scorpius had been too well organized, too well equipped to be acting alone. "I need to investigate," the human said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "There's more to this than meets the eye." Xyrax nodded, his compound eyes glinting with understanding. "I'll come with you. Whatever threats remain, we'll face them together." Holmes clasped the Cindy's clawed hand, feeling the strength in his own grip. They had been enemies once, but now they were something more. They were brothers in arms, united by a common cause. As Holmes delved into the mystery, his enhanced abilities proved invaluable. He could hack into encrypted databases with ease, his mind processing data at lightning speed, and what he found chilled him to the bone. The Scorpius were merely pawns, manipulated by a shadowy cabal known as the Void Collective. This group, composed of powerful individuals from across the galaxy, sought to destabilize the galactic order and reshape it in their own twisted image. Holmes knew that he couldn't face this threat alone. He needed allies, warriors with the skills and courage to stand against the darkness, and he knew just where to start. He sought out Xyrax, the Xindi general who had once been his bitterest rival. Together they began to assemble a team of the galaxy's most dangerous individuals, humans, Xindi, and members of a dozen other species, each with their own unique abilities and motivations. As they prepared to embark on their new mission, Holmes felt a grim sense of purpose settling over him. The Void Collective threatened everything he held dear, and he would stop at nothing to bring them to justice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and Holmes was ready to fight for it with every fiber of his being. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, he would protect his people and his newfound allies. The hunt for the Void Collective had begun, and heaven help anyone who stood in their way. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.